broadening your horizon is what every living being not only genuinely desires, but heartily pursues and intentionally invests in. For in the gathering of men, only those whose minds are in tune with the dynamics of the past, present, and future innovations, inventions, politics, and governance are respected. We are Spectrum Television, and broadening your horizon is our obsession. Risk on your decoder now to connect Spectrum Television on the frequency 12.
Good afternoon and welcome. This is Spotlight Africa. We're coming to you live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. Today on Spotlight Africa, United States Department of State reports point to dire state of human rights in Ethiopia. Gabon's Council of Ministers grants amnesty for 2023 coup and 2019 conspiracy attempts. Emmanuel Macron admits French repression in Cameroon's independence struggle. Ugandan opposition files petition to quash legislation allowing military courts to try civilians. Plus, dozens killed in attack on Sudan camp for people who had fled war. These stories are all just ahead on Spotlight Africa. Stay with us. Good afternoon, thanks for joining us. We're bringing you stories all around the continent this afternoon. First, we look at the United States Department of State, which has released a report on the human rights situation in Ethiopia for 2024. The picture painted by the document is bleak: extrajudicial killings, torture, and mass detentions. These are some of the abuses detailed in the latest annual report on the human rights situation in Ethiopia, released by the U.S. Department of State. Although the civil war in the Tigray region ended in 2022, Ethiopia is still plagued by armed conflict. The Ethiopian army regularly clashed with militias in the Amhara and Oromia regions throughout the past year. According to the U.S. State Department, which compiled information from reports from Human Rights Watch, HRW, and Amnesty International into its report, the fighting in 2024 led to widespread killings of civilians, mass forced displacement, ethnic cleansing, rape, and other forms of violence against women and girls, as well as looting and destruction of property, notably by militias in Amhara. Now, according to reports, at least 1,351 civilians were killed nationwide between January 2023 and January 2024. The report has also detailed limitations to press freedom and freedom of speech, as well as a rising number of civilian abduction cases. In July 2024, 3 buses carrying 167 passengers were reportedly hijacked in Oromia, leading to demands for ransom. A particularly vulnerable group to these abuses are refugees. Ethiopia currently hosts large numbers of civilians fleeing conflict, notably from neighboring Sudan. Away from that, in a move aimed at fostering national unity, Gabon's Council of Ministers have adopted a sweeping amnesty order covering participants in the 2023 coup and a failed 2019 uprising. The decision, announced on August 12, paves way for the release of detained rebels, including high-profile figures, while the government also outlines economic reforms targeting growth, deficit reduction, and job protection for Gabonese citizens. The newly approved amnesty order applies to members of the Committee for Transition and Restoration of Institutions, which ousted former President Ali Bongo in August of 2023, as well as those involved in a botched 2019 coup attempt. Among the beneficiaries is Lieutenant Kelly Otto Obiang, a former Republican Guard officer, along with Dimitri Nitcom and Esime Bedima, who were sentenced to 15 years in prison for their roles in the 2019 rebellion. The government framed the decision as a step toward appeasement and national reconciliation, signaling a definitive close to years of political instability. The move aligns with earlier promises by transitional President Bryce Oligwe Nguema, who had vowed not to forget his allies behind bars. Move now to Kenya, where magistrate says the cause of death of British tycoon Harry Roy Vivers, whose exhumed body has been in a morgue for 11 years, cannot be determined. David Odhiambo ordered the inquest to be closed, saying that due to the level of the body's decomposition at the time of exhumation, months after his burial, it was too hard to say what led to his death, and nobody can be called to answer any charge. Vivers died on Valentine's Day in 2013 in the coastal city of Mombasa. He was buried in accordance with Islamic rites and without a post-mortem. It led to a lengthy legal battle, with his two sons from a previous marriage calling for an investigation into how their father had died. The sons, Richard and Philip Vivers, who were living in the UK, accused their father's second wife, Asra Pervin Dean, and her daughters, Helen and Alexandra, of being involved in his death, allegedly so that they could inherit his multi-million-dollar estate. They have vehemently denied any wrongdoing. On Tuesday, Odhiambo ruled that because of the state of the body and the conflicting reports by the pathologist, government chemists and other experts, no charges could be made. Meanwhile, a new report by the British Army has found out that soldiers at the Batuk base in Kenya are using sex workers at a low to moderate degree despite its zero-tolerance policy in July 2022. The UK's Defence Ministry announced that it was banning all sexual activity which involves the abuse of power, including buying sex whilst abroad. However, a June report found that there had been at least 35 allegations of transactional sex or sexual exploitation at the Kenya base since the ban. Of these incidents, 9 violations were allegedly committed after the full training and implementation of the policy was completed in November 2022. The report stated that offenders had been given varying punishments ranging from demotion to a £2,000 fine and minor administrative action. Other suspects had their charges dropped due to insufficient evidence. Walker, who commissioned the report, said that he would implement its recommendations in full, including increasing the Army's ability to discharge people for using sex workers. Meanwhile, more than 7,500 Army personnel served at Batuk, situated near the central Kenyan town of Nyakui, during the time of the investigation. In another development, opponents of Uganda's government have asked the Constitutional Court to quash new legislation that would allow military courts to prosecute civilians over fears the law could be used for political purposes. Recall that the Supreme Court barred the prosecution of civilians in the tribunals in January, saying they lacked the legal competence to conduct criminal trials in a fair and impartial manner. But in May, Parliament passed a bill to reinstate the right of military courts to prosecute civilians, and President Yoweri Museveni signed it into law. Local and international rights campaigners have long accused Uganda's government of using military courts to pursue political opponents of President Yoweri Museveni, 80, who has been in power for almost 40 years. But officials say only civilians who use guns for political violence are prosecuted in those tribunals. After Museveni signed the law, the then Army spokesperson Chris Magezi praised it, saying it would deter the formation of militant political groups, while Uganda's military chief Muhoozi Kangaba, who is also Museveni's son, congratulated lawmakers for passing the law. Many supporters and leaders of the NUPE, including singer-turned-politician Bobby Wine, who is preparing to challenge Museveni in next year's election, have previously been charged or prosecuted by military tribunals. In a separate development, French President Emmanuel Macron has acknowledged the violence committed by his country's forces in Cameroon during and after the Central African nation's struggle for independence. It followed a joint report by Cameroonian and French historians examining France's suppression of independence movements from 1945 to 1971. In a letter to Cameroon's President Paul Biya made public on Tuesday, Macron said the report made clear a war had taken place in Cameroon during which the colonial authorities and the French army exercised repressive violence of several kinds in certain regions of the country. However, Macron fell short of offering a clear apology for the atrocities committed by French troops in its former colony, which gained independence in 1960. The French leader cited 4 independence icons who were killed during military operations led by French forces, including Ruben Omyobi, the firebrand leader of the anti-colonialist UPC party. According to reports, France pushed hundreds of thousands of Cameroonians into internment camps and supported brutal militias to quash the independence struggle. Cape Verde declares state of emergency after deadly floods. Stay tuned for details of this and more in a moment.
Broadening your horizon is what every living being not only genuinely desires, but heartily pursues and intentionally invests in. For in the gathering of men, only those whose minds are in tune with the dynamics of the past, present, and future innovations, inventions, politics, and governance are respected. We are Spectrum Television, and broadening your horizon is our obsession. Risk on your decoder now to connect Spectrum Television on the frequency 12589, symbol rate 26250. That is frequency 12589, symbol rate 26250. Polarization horizontal, and join our online community at spectrumtvlive.ng. For further inquiries, please call 0704 158 5642 or 0704 541 7707. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Welcome back and thanks for staying tuned. Of course, this is still Spotlight Africa. We move on now to Cape Verde, where there has been a sad development and a state of emergency has been declared on the island of São Vicente and Santo Antão after deadly floods which killed at least 9 people and forced 1,500 from their homes. The state of emergency activates crisis funds and urgent infrastructure repairs in the Atlantic Ocean island of the west coast of Africa. Monday's flash floods were triggered by Tropical Storm Erin, leading to 193 millimeters of rain in just 5 hours, far above São Vicente's annual average. Deputy Prime Minister Olavo Correa told reporters the floods were catastrophic. Meanwhile, rescue teams are desperately searching for missing people, while roads, homes and vehicles have been severely damaged. Commenting on the heavy rains, Esther Brito, from the country's Meteorology Institute told newsmen that the weather conditions were uncommon. Elsewhere, at least 40 people have been killed in an attack on a camp for displaced people in Sudan's western Darfur region, according to an aid group that works there. The Abu Shok Emergency Response Room said Monday's assault was carried out by the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. The resistance committee in nearby El Fasher city, made up of local citizens and activists, also reported this. El Fasher, which came under intense attack as well, is the last major foothold in Darfur for the army and its allies, which have been fighting the paramilitary RSF in the 2-year civil war. The conflict has triggered a humanitarian crisis, with the UN warning that families trapped in the besieged city face starvation. Sudanese media reported that the camp was caught in the crossfire of the fighting in El Fasher, but the aid group inside Abu Shuk, where at least 200,000 people live, said some of those killed in the attack were shot in their homes while others were gunned down in public. Lastly, today on Spotlight Africa, South Sudan's Pibor area crimes are a frequent occurrence, but a new mobile court supported by the United Nations mission to the country is helping fight this problem. Greater Pibor is rich with vibrant cultural traditions and history. The communities celebrate their identity through traditional attire, ceremonies, and spiritual practices that bind them together. However, a more toxic and deadly shared experience is the phenomenon of cattle raiding, combined with sexual violence and child abduction, which is also deeply embedded in the culture and a major source of conflict between communities. Too often, the perpetrators of crimes such as these go unpunished. However, a new mobile court deployed to Pibor with the assistance of the United Nations mission in South Sudan and the South Sudan Reconciliation Stabilization Resilience Trust Fund is helping combat this historical impunity. Over 4 weeks, the court adjudicated 16 complex criminal cases, resulting in the conviction of 5 offenders. Another 10 civil cases, mostly related to land disputes, which are often a major source of tension and conflict, were also decided. At this time, these are all the stories we are able to cover on the continent. Do well to follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtvlive.ng. This has been Spotlight Africa. I am Uyai MM. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Good afternoon.